In Roman Catholicism, the church has two wings of what sometimes we call the rites. We have the Western Church and the Eastern Church. And in this series, I would like to talk to you about what the Eastern churches are. From the 1st to the 7th centuries of Christianity, Christianity spread throughout the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. And these communities, especially the Christian communities and their ways of life, grew up around the Mediterranean basin. What is the notion of the Eastern churches? In fact, the term Eastern Church has a geographical reference which is derived from the worldview of antiquity. And in the worldview of antiquity, Eastern means that the eastern part of the Roman Empire. And like the sun, the gospel of Christ comes from the east, from Palestine. And in the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 1, verse 8, St. Luke tells us that you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all of Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. So, the gospel, the sun, comes from the east. So this notion of the Eastern churches means that we are witnesses, and a lot of churches grew up around the eastern half of the Mediterranean basin. When we talk about the Eastern churches, the first churches were founded around Armenia, Samaria, Ethiopia, Cyprus, Egypt, Jerusalem, and all these churches have the Eastern churches in their midst. And of great importance in this subject of the Eastern church is the division between the East and the West of the Roman Empire after the death of Emperor Theodosius I in 395. So when we talk about the Eastern churches, these are churches that grew around the Mediterranean basin, and also the great division of the East from the West after the death of Emperor Theodosius I in 395. What are the other names of the Eastern Christian churches? 1, we have Eastern Catholic Church. We have the Oriental Catholic Church. We have the Eastern Rite Catholic Church. And we have the Eastern Rite Catholicism. These are the different names of the Eastern Christian churches: Eastern Catholic Church, Oriental Catholic Church, Eastern Rite Catholic Church, and Eastern Rite Catholicism. When you hear of these names, know that they are referring to Eastern Christian churches. And there are about 23 Eastern Christian churches which are sui juris particular to the Roman Catholic Church, and they are in full communion with the Pope, that is the Bishop of Rome. So what is the unity and the diversity in the Eastern Christian churches? In the Roman Catholic Church, as I have said in the beginning, there is always that division or those rites of the Western Church and the Eastern Church. So some people asked, what is the unity? What is the diversity? Christ, in his Great Commission, sent the apostles to teach, to baptize, and to make disciples of all nations. Matthew chapter 28, verse 19 to 21. So this threefold commissioning is the basis of the essential unity of the gospel in both the East and the West. So just as how Christ commissioned the apostles to teach, to baptize, and to make disciples of all nations, this Great Commission is the basis of the essential unity of the church in the East and in the West. And in these structures of the Great Commissioning, the church from the East and the church from the West have their essential unity. And also, the basis of the diversity between the Eastern Church and the Western Church also comes from these great commissioning: to baptize, to teach, and to make disciples of all nations. Although the Eastern Church is distinct theologically, liturgically, and historically from the Western Church, it is in full communion with the Western Church. So when we hear about the diversity and the unity, it all comes from the Great Commissioning in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 28, verse 19 to 29. And this threefold commissioning is the basis of the essential unity and also the basis of the diversity. So the Eastern Church have their own distinct theology, they have their own distinct liturgy, and they have their own distinct historical underpinnings. In the next series, we will learn about these distinctness among the Eastern Church and the Western Church. The Eastern Church is the churches that grew up around the eastern basin of the Mediterranean. And this church has its historical, theological, and liturgical underpinnings. When today you hear about the Eastern Church, know that they are the churches that grew and that have their own traditions and styles, and they are in the Mediterranean basin, and they have their churches around Samaria, Ethiopia, Antioch, Asia Minor, Cyprus, Egypt, and they are in full communion with the Catholic Church. It is because they are at the eastern parts of the world. That is why they are called the Eastern Church. Let us subscribe to this series and we will learn more about what Eastern churches are.